I'm going to be doing a full unboxing of my robotic lawnmower on this video, but before I do that, I want to share my perspective on how the robotic and AI space is changing the way preppers do emergency preparedness and how you might adjust and think about it in the future too. Here's the thing, robotics is here to stay, and you can't really deny that. Everything is changing very, very rapidly. Even Elon Musk has the Optimus robot coming up, and that's what he's sending to Mars in the very near future. And that's just going to change everything. In this particular phase, robotic lawnmowers are really nice because they help free up a lot of time, and that's my primary reason for purchasing it in the first place. Is it's going to free up anywhere between 1 to 3 hours every single week. And what that does for my emergency preparedness side is that I can spend that time going to do some of my other projects around the house, like maintaining the concrete, maintaining the siding of the house, and just doing house maintenance, prepper projects, doing my pantry builds, my basement storage builds, things like that. I free up a lot of my time every single weekend. And if the grass is growing much more rapidly in a given week, sometimes I have to mow it twice. And that's why it can save me closer to like that 3-ish hour range in a given week. Now, you may ask yourself, what does like maintenance have to do with emergency preparedness and prepping in the first place? And I would argue that a lot more than you think, because if your property is properly maintained and you have that extra time just to take it to the next level of maintenance, that means when an emergency scenario happens, everything is in tip-top shape and there's far less probability that something will break or something happen, like a leak in the house or siding that got cracked or is molding issues, because you're just going to have more time to observe and maintain your house. So I would argue that it is very important to free up that time to do that maintenance around your property. And in order for you, when an emergency scenario happens, then you don't have to be distracted with trying to figure out those maintenance issues. So there's real practical reasons that it's just good to maintain your property in the first place, though. Those are a couple of the reasons why I think it does impact the prepper space by just freeing up time to do those general maintenance projects. We're going to start seeing robots just completely change our lifestyle in the next 20, 30 years, maybe even sooner than that. I mean, already right now, I just purchased a robotic lawnmower to free up a few hours, and Optimus is coming not too far in the future. And so there's going to be robots that people can purchase similar to a car to help do daily chores and normal things like doing dishes and doing the laundry and being able to weed the garden and remember to do the watering of the garden and help do maintenance projects, do the electrical work, all this random things that currently you have to do and spend your time on that distract you. It's really going to change the game for emergency preparedness. And I'm sure that there's going to be other elevated risks, such as the fact that you've got a robot that can do a lot of things. I mean, it is very classic of a story, a Terminator story. So there are going to be future risks that we'll have to address in the emergency preparedness. But I anticipate that people will still, even the preppers, will still be buying these robots and using them because it will make their daily life better. And their neighbors are going to have to have it anyways. And there's going to be things like that. It's just going to be present in the future. I mean, it seems so futuristic, but it will be something that you have to monitor. And if there are things that firearms can't even handle, then there's probably going to be different types of weaponry that preppers are going to need to be able to face these off. So I digress. These are all the fun topics that I just ponder over sometimes. So let's get into this full unboxing of the lawnmower, because I think that you'll find it just entertaining by itself. All right, now that I'm just gonna start unboxing this so you can see what it looks like. I just got it in the mail now. This particular version is the all-wheel drive mini, and I did get the battery pack that was a little bit larger because my lawn is closer to 0.35 acres, and so this one I believe is supposed to do about 0.37. I suspect you can still use the smaller one, but it just depends how much of the lawn you're going to do in a single day. But I'm sure the smaller one can still do that larger size lawn. It just might take over the couple of days. So let's just go ahead and open this up. At the very top, you get this big diagram. It gives you the step-by-step guide to put it together. They do lay it out well. It's well packaged. It's very secure. So this first part, this is the vision sensor. This is one of the pieces that you have to attach on. And so we'll attach this shortly. To pull this up, I'm going to pull out these cables. They're all very unique cables, so it's very easy to know what to do here. And they snap into place here, the white to white. And then there's a circular one but now that I've got all three of those together, we're just going to tuck it in here. This compartment is big enough for something like an air tag or something like that. If you wanted to have some extra security, certainly do that. There are 4 screws. And now this little piece here, it's really just cardboard, what was on it before. So we can toss this component right here because we don't need that. On the side of my patio, the reason why is right behind here, I've got an electrical box that I'm going to just be tying into. And I'm going to be moving this once I install my shed anyways. And I'm going to be mulching over this. So I don't care if the grass gets dead here. But those bolts that we just put in, we're just going to screw them in. And it's very easy to do by hand. All right, I just plugged it in and put this robot in the back here. It doesn't even need to click back, which is nice. It's got just a contact, so it just needs to contact the back there. And I just plugged it in the wall, and you can see that it came a little over 3/4 charged already, which is enough, plenty enough to get through this install, the rest of the install. Now that the robot is charging, we just have to assemble this RTK, and it is very, very basic. We're just going to put some of these pieces together. All right, so first of all, there's this little rubber piece here, and that's because this is the stake if you want to push it into the ground, which I will be doing and during this assembly. So that piece will actually go right here, and I'll just thread right in. And then when you're ready to attach this to the side of a house or a different location, you can just unscrew this, and you've got the rest of this unit ready to bolt in. And they do provide some bolts to use, which is nice if you're trying to mount it to a wall. And then I've got this other piece I'm just going to screw in there. Now we've got this RTK unit. This is what is connecting and talking with the satellites, and got this antenna, and this antenna actually points down. So it slides in right here. They've got a cover here, but this antenna points downwards. I'm going to set these aside for when I do want to mount it to the house later on. I'm going to set these aside, make sure I keep them in a good spot so I know exactly what they're for. All right, so I brought this RTK out, and one thing I did notice here was that they provide an extra power cord, and you can actually connect the RTK unit directly to, they kind of have this splice off from the base unit. And that way, if your use case is to be able to attach it and use the same power cord, then great. But they do provide a separate battery bank like this, so that if your unit needs to be further away at a different location from the house, you have a separate power pack and battery. Now you see that we've actually completed that full assembly here, and it was pretty straightforward. We attached that top component, we established the base and put it into the ground and plugged it in. Then there was 2 options, either to attach it to the house or directly into the ground. We chose directly into this ground for this first one, and that's what we did there. And now finally in step 4 is going to be downloading the app. They've got a QR code right there, and then you're going to be setting up the route and going through the process on the app itself. I've been spending about the last week trying to troubleshoot different things, fine tune, see how I like it. And I've found some troubleshooting steps because I actually didn't get everything to work right away on the first try. And I had to figure out why the lawnmower wasn't working. So there were a couple issues that happened. So one of the first things I started with was I put the RTK too close to the house. Now, I was aware that it needed to be further away, so it was pretty easy to figure out what needed to be done. And there are error logs and notifications within the app itself that help guide you through what the troubleshooting step might be. Now, when I was mapping out the perimeter of my yard, I wasn't able to get connection to the satellite or whatever needed to get connection and see the position of the robot. Now, I immediately knew that this was because the RTK wasn't far enough away from the house. So then what I did is I repositioned it, followed the guidelines, made sure everything was good, and then I redid the perimeter. And every time you move the RTK unit, you have to redo all of your mapping. You can, however, move your charging station without changing the mapping that you have preset. And this is a useful thing to know because when you're troubleshooting and trying to figure out why things aren't working, then every time you set the RTK unit or move it, and if it's part of your troubleshooting step, that means that in order for you to run your test again, you're going to have to remap things in the first place. And depending on the size of lawn you have, that can take some time to go remap it. And it's really just walking the perimeter of your yard, but this unit does typically go pretty slow. And when you're mapping your perimeter, you want to go slow to get every nook and cranny and be able to navigate around and get that line that you want, that perimeter line. You do want to go a little bit slower, and as such, it can take, I don't know, I think it took me about 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes every time I had to remap it. And actually, it was probably closer to 15 to 20 minutes after the no-go zones as well, because I have different trees that I has to go around. So knowing that every time you move the RTK unit and reposition it, it wipes all of that is useful to know. So just get it in the right position right away. And then whenever you need to change the charging station and you're trying to find better locations or troubleshoot with that, you can relocate that without it wiping your maps. And I'll go into how this was one of the issues I was having. So the other issue, after I got the mapping, I started mowing, but it wasn't returning back to my unit and the charging station. It would just find a random spot and go there. And I couldn't figure out why. So I ended up moving my charging station again. And it was able to get back to the charging station, but it wasn't charging. And in fact, I was having a hard time getting it to charge even manually when I lift the robot up to it. And I had another problem is when I was deploying it, I had about probably like a 4-foot width prior to it hitting one of my garden boxes. And I guess it needs a little bit more runway to be able to deploy and release off of the docking charging station. So that's one important thing to note is make sure that there's probably, call it 8 feet, you should be good in front of that so that it can deploy off of the charging station in a straight path. Otherwise, it'll hit its front bumper and it'll stop. And then I moved my charging station again, and this was the third time I moved it. And at that stage, it had plenty of runway. I clicked in the app to relocate the charging station. The mapping wasn't wiped. All things are good. I clicked go, and it was returning back to the charging station at that point. And even though it was returning, and I was really excited because I went through a few troubleshooting steps, but it just wasn't charging, and I was not really figuring out why. And after I tried to understand how it all works and how the connections, I figured out that it was because there was a really subtle peak in the middle of the charging station. The ground wasn't level enough. And you don't need perfectly level ground, but what you can't have is the back of that charger to be tilted at all. And the reason why is the robot itself has 2 flat plates for the charging connector. And then the charging station has 2 prongs. And they have to meet flat next to each other. And the charging station, because it was tilted a little bit over a curve once the stakes were in, it made it so that the prongs came up at a slight angle and couldn't get a full connection. And it took me a little bit to figure it out because it was pretty close to flat. But when I looked a little bit more closely, it was slightly bent, just slightly. And what I ended up doing to solve that is I just put a shim on the backside just to bring it up slightly, and then it worked. Everything was working fine at that stage. So those were the levels of troubleshooting steps I had to go to for it to actually work fully and work as expected. And because each of those stages took time to have it redeploy, do a section of the yard, test again, redeploy, it ended up taking me probably 5 to 6 days end to end to ultimately now getting it working. And I think I just needed my expectations to be a little bit different coming into this. I would say that I had a lot of fun even while troubleshooting it, and it wasn't hard to work through those. But at first I thought there was a defective unit or a defective charging station, an infrared issue, whatnot, and it wasn't. I just needed more patience working through some troubleshooting steps. And I think if you end up buying this yourself, you'll find that the app is very intuitive overall, but give yourself some extra leeway to work through troubleshooting things. And don't be afraid to Google and figure out how the system works a little bit better to get educated guesses. Look at the error logs is another way, so you can say that, okay, it's just not, it's at the return station, it just isn't charging, so there's maybe an issue with the positioning. And then from there, I had an issue at one point connecting one of my task areas and creating a channel to my charging station. And I think that a little bit more guidance on how to do the mapping would have been nice, even though the app was pretty intuitive. I guess I didn't really think through the different steps as much as I should have. I ended up dividing my rather small yard into the front yard and then the backyard so I could run 2 different task areas. I also really like the 3-inch setting, and I keep it at the smallest speed too. And I didn't realize how long it would take to get the whole yard done. It probably takes a full 8 hours for my 0.36 acres. And that's because it is returning to the charging station, charging for 2 hours, and then going out and doing a chunk. I could increase my speed of the unit, and that would probably make it done faster, but my guess is that it just wouldn't get as clean of a cut. So I don't mind just waiting as long as it does the automatic charge in the first place. Now, there's a couple other areas within the app that it took a little getting used to, understanding how the buttons for the manual control work. It wasn't really obvious on the screen where they were and to push on them. Now, after using it, now it's obvious, but it would have been nice to make the image be more of like a joystick pattern. So it was really obvious that those were buttons and like joysticks on the screen. That would have been nice for the manual control overall. There was also setting the perimeter, and they have an auto mapping feature. I didn't use it because my lawn blends with my neighbors, and it was a little bit easier for me to manually do it. That was a pretty easy process. You just start on the perimeter, and you walk all the way around, and then you kind of loop back around to get the inside of the perimeter too. So it's not just the outside perimeter. You're going to loop it in and get the inside of that perimeter too of the lawn. Then you're going to set up your no-go zones, and you're going to set those up around trees, around garden boxes, any type of obstacle that may impact your unit from being able to turn and navigate around the yard. The AI vision sensor doesn't necessarily, is not really designed for that. It's just supposed to be with obstacles within its path, not the no-go zones. So make sure to do that. And then the final thing is understanding what the channel setting is. A channel is to connect one task area to another. And one example of that is actually connecting the charging station to your task area. So you do need to often create a channel between the task area and your charging station, unless you happen to have put your charging station like in that task area. And that final step with the channel took me a little bit to figure out why I was getting error on starting the mow process. The robot is outside of the task area, and you just have to configure that last little component. Overall, I've been really happy with it working now. It did take some troubleshooting. It's already saving myself a lot of time. I've been doing a lot more weeding during the week because it has been helping out. The patterns are really beautiful, and I like that it can change the pattern every single week and has a randomized setting, so it'll like pick a direction and randomly do it just to not do the same pattern every week. And because it's thinner, it's going to have smaller lines, and I think it just looks prettier to have it be thinner lines across the yard than like a much larger one that your traditional mower would have. And on a small lawn, that looks really pretty, and it's been easy to just click the go button. I feel very comfortable with it around my toddler. My toddler is a little bit older than a toddler, 4-year-old, and I have a newborn. So that I feel very comfortable with it out and about. And I've also used it at night already, and that has been a nice option to be able to let it run at night. And it's working really well now, and I have no complaints really. But those are some of the troubleshooting tips that I found useful to maybe set your expectations when you're trying to set this up in the first place. We covered a lot on this video, and I hope you liked it. You found a lot of educational content, found my perspective maybe a little bit different, even found some troubleshooting tips useful either prior to buying this or maybe you just purchased it yourself. So make sure you subscribe and see some of the other content that I think that you'd really like to.